Yesterday we introduced the notation and the 4 basic patterns. Yeah? There are obviously, there's more patterns than those 4. But these 4 are selected for a very specific reason. Each pattern causes a different relationship with the space. So I want to review that for you first before I show you the composition. So the first pattern is the easiest, synchronous lateral. And in this situation, the hands keep changing distance. So they go closer and further away. So the direction that the hands move in relationship to each other is important. For the second pattern, I introduced the center lane, the number 1. This causes her left and right hand to alternate on the midline. So we are conditioning her behavior on step 2 to start switching hands on the center. We want to get her to cross her midline, but we begin by getting her to switch hands on the midline. We are encouraging the behavior that we want. Right? For the third pattern, this is to stimulate reflectiveness in the brain. So visually, she's processing a reflective pattern. Because the hands, they don't change distance. They're always the same distance, they only change location in space. So again, another type of stimulation, another relationship with space. For the fourth pattern, we have to cross our midline. This is the first one where we actually cross our midline. Technically, this would be bilateral. But because right now we're synchronous, what you will observe in a lot of people when you present that pattern is you will observe either a twisting or a shifting of their weight. The reason they are doing this is because there's a natural resistance to cross your midline. So it is easier for them to just shift the location. They shift their perception of their midline either by swinging back and forth or by twisting like this. So even though it might look like a bilateral movement, when it's synchronous, it's not. It can be, but you have to really want to do it. The reason that's important is because when we get into asynchronous later on, there's going to be a tendency now for the person, they have a choice. Which condition do they prioritize? The space or the time? Because of the way we are constructed, our relationship with space, we're very dominant for the space more than the time. We process space more than we process time. So it's very common when you give the fourth pattern asynchronous, the person will use the same hand. Left, left, right, right. And then what we're going to be doing is using the synchronous timing to condition her body to the space first. So this repetition conditions her to be in that position, and then I can start to do things like change the time. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So each pattern has a purpose. Each pattern has a function to develop a different capacity. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to arrange them into a choreography. We call the primary composition. The primary composition is a very effective way to develop all the capacities of juggling in one session. We have 2 pattern goals. The first pattern goal is this is pattern 5. I haven't introduced it yet. But this is the goal of the first activity. It's 4, 2, 1, 3, 5. 4, 2, 1, 3, 5. And what this pattern does is this is a new state. In the composition, I present all the synchronous lateral together. I present all the asynchronous lateral together because we're trying to develop those capacities, those specific capacities. In the end, we want the person to have the ability to switch between formations, to switch between lateral and bilateral. So pattern 5 is very similar to a Mills-Mess stimulation. You guys know Mills-Mess. There's another pattern we're going to do later where the balls start to change lanes. And this is identical to the Mills-Mess sequence, and that's going to be our goal. The reason that's our goal is because those are patterns that are reflective, geometrically reflective. So we have the spatial relationship. They require crossing of the midline, and every object changes hands. So that is a great pattern to secure our knowledge that the person has all the sequencing capacity required in juggling. If you can do this Mills-Mess pattern, like you've done every formula. Now it's just about developing your coordination and how do you want to express these ideas. So our goal is to get them to that pattern. ¿Qué más? I think the best way this works is for me to demonstrate, and then we can reflect afterwards. There are some key points I want to highlight for you. so you know what to kind of pay attention to. Because once I start facilitating, I will not be speaking. So the first one is to take a look at the patterns that I'm using and the order that I'm presenting them. The second thing is to look at the tempo. Pay attention to when the tempo changes. Anytime you see me change tempo, there's a reason I'm changing tempo. And it's in response to the participant. I'm trying to assist the participant. If I go faster or slower, I'm always trying to assist her. So pay attention to the speed, when it changes, and why. There are 3 parts to the composition because there are 3 ways that we interact with the board. The first part of the composition we call fixed state, or estado cerrado. Yeah? Fixed state. Closed state. Closed state. Because the balls, they do not change location. And then we have another way to play, which is open, where the balls will change location. So you'll go here, and I go here. These are called open state patterns. That's the second part of the composition. And the third part of the composition is when we work with it by ourselves. So I'm only going to demonstrate the first part of the composition now. We'll talk about it, and then we'll spend the next few hours learning it. Okay? You guys ready?
Okay.
You can say, I want it to be more comfortable for you. Está bien. Primary composition. Phase 1. So, I think when you see it, it seems sort of easy, it seems sort of natural. That was an easy facilitation. She responded to everything that I used. It was a good example because when I went to pattern 4, she did exactly what I said would happen. She prioritized the space instead of the time. So to make those corrections, there's different techniques we can use to adjust the time. What I did was I used a technique I call packeting, and I went back to the synchronous state to condition her body, because I know if it's synchronous, her hands will be in the right position. And then what I started to do was play with the time, and I did duck, duck. So it's not synchronous and it's not asynchronous. And what that allows me to do is that allows me to instruct her, to guide her, to help her get to where I want her to be without having to explain it. It's good that I don't have to explain it because that means I can work with people who don't speak. But it's also good because it doesn't create anxiety. If she never knows what I want, she's constantly having to find the solutions herself. I'm never giving her the answers. This is why this can be a challenge to facilitate this way with high-functioning adults. If you roll a child a ball or someone with disabilities a ball, they will roll it right back to you every time. If you roll a high-functioning adult a ball, they will look at the ball and then they will look at you and they will ask you what you want them to do. What should I do? What the fuck do you think you should do? They know the answer, so I just sit there and I wait. And then they roll me the ball. I highlight this point again because of this anxiety that is there. And this dominant mind frame, this linear mind frame, that there's an expectation always in life. I think circus people, we can forget about this pressure because we're a very free community. But I work with people in positions of power all the time. They seem so confident. You put them here and they become so insecure because I'm not giving them answers. That's how this works. You create the opportunity for the person to discover the juggling. I'm not teaching her to juggle. I didn't tell her to go asynchronous here. I presented a problem and she solved it. So every person gets to discover juggling themselves. Again, this makes it more personal. But when you work with high-functioning people, you will find a resistance to this type of facilitation. They want answers. They want to know, they'll ask, am I doing it correct? Am I winning? These type of questions. This is not a competitive idea. This is collective. This is shared. We're gonna break down the composition into its sections by its formation. So we're gonna learn each section on its own. The goal here is now to be able to move from one pattern to the other without stopping. It is very important that we can do this sequence without stopping. Because it's the rhythm, it's the tempo that creates the impulse to move. Involuntary movement. At the beginning, I'm trying to stimulate involuntary movement. So that when I see her body start to move before I send the ball, now I know I have involuntary movement. Movement that's being triggered by the rhythm, not by her thought. Because I have that rhythm, because I have that tempo, that's what allows me to make these suggestions. That's what allows me to play these tricks on the person to get them to transform. If I don't have tempo, I don't have communication. So maintaining tempo is really important. It takes a lot of practice. Okay? It's okay if you're not able to run the whole composition by the end of this class. It's important that you understand the composition and you know what your goal is. Okay? I'm going to just demonstrate for you the first part of the composition. At this point, it's easier to refer to the patterns by their number rather than by their notation. Because if I'm constantly thinking 23, 45, 23, 45, there's a lot of stuff to think about. And I want my focus to be on the person. So it's better to learn the pattern and say, okay, pattern 1. Patrona 1. Y segundo, patrona 2. Y patrona 3. Y transición, patrona 4. Can I see the document? Yes. So all of this is written here. Now we are on the notation. Something I have to show you. If you notice in the notation, each notation has its number, which number it is. So you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 3. Oh, that should say 2, that's a typo. This last one here, I forgot about this. It says 4, but it should say 2. I will come around and help you.
Okay.
That should say number 2. The last one should say number 2. I thought I fixed that. I will come around.